Yeah, so good evening. What we endeavor to do today is to look into the nervous system, covering the peripheral nervous system. But before we do that, maybe we just look into the overview of the central nervous system and in relation to the peripheral nervous system. As you know, your nervous system is made up of two components basically. We're talking of our central nervous system that is made up of your brain and the spinal cord. And speaking of the peripheral nervous system, of which we're not getting into the intricate details for now, maybe just to begin off with, we would want to know the relationship between the central nervous system and your peripheral nervous system. You realize that your central nervous system is said to be the command center of your nervous system, whereas your peripheral nervous system refers to the front line of your nervous system. And as usual, it's profitable that before you get into the nitty-gritties of any subject that you want to study, you get to acquaint yourself with the objectives. What do you want to achieve for today? What do you want to achieve in today's lecture? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read out my objective for the lesson, so as to make sure that I don't get excited along the lines, because we need to go step by step in order to aid our retention, since the purpose of this is to make sure that you pass our exam with flying colors. So with me here is about 8 objectives that I'm going to be looking into. Objective number 1 is what I've already identified, that is identification of our central nervous system as the command center of our nervous system, whereas the peripheral nervous system is seen as the front line. Then objective number 2 is the nervous system. What is our nervous system? Particularly what we're looking into today is the peripheral nervous system. So we want to define what the peripheral nervous system is, and we also want to identify our nervous system with the other type of system that it works with. That is objective number 3. And the other thing that we're going to be looking into, the type of messages. Like as we said there are basically two systems that work together in relaying of messages in our body. We are talking of your endocrine system and the central nervous system. So what we want to do is to identify the type of messages that are being relayed within the systems. Then the other thing that we're going to do again is we're going to be looking into the types of neurons within our nervous system, and the other objectives that we're going to look into is the activities that are controlled by our peripheral nervous system. Remember what we said today, what we want to achieve today is to look into the nitty-gritties of the peripheral nervous system. We shall get to cover the central nervous system some other time. And then the other objectives that we're going to be looking into is the neurotransmitters that are involved. Like if you remember, we said that our peripheral nervous system works together with the endocrine nervous system. That being said, in order for the information to fire, we need neurotransmitters to relay the chemical messages that we have. And then lastly, we are going to look into how our internal activities are controlled by the autonomic nervous system. And then lastly, we're going to look into how the sympathetic nervous system is related to our somatic nervous system. Yeah, now that we have read out the objective, we can now resume like pointed out previously. We now know that our central nervous system, basically let's call it our nervous system, has a relationship with the endocrine system. And now what we endeavor to do is to explain the relationship intricately, the relationship that exists between your nervous system and your nervous system and the endocrine system. Like when you get into look into your central nervous system, it is made up of your brain and also the spinal cord. Which part of the brain then can we say is the control center or sort of the interface between your endocrine system and the central nervous system? Because in order for the endocrine system to communicate with your central nervous system, or your nervous system rather, what we need is an interface in order for that to happen. What is our interface? Our interface is found within the forebrain of your brain. That is our hypothalamus. And how does our hypothalamus regulate the relationship that is between our nervous system and our endocrine system? We realize that what the hypothalamus does, it is connected to the pituitary gland, which is responsible for regulating hormones. Our hypothalamus has got two connections to the pituitary gland. It can either be, there is a channel which is to your anterior portion, so you can say that your pituitary gland is divided into two glands. We have got the anterior gland and the posterior gland. So you realize that your hypothalamus communicate with your pituitary gland either through impulses, nerve impulses. It communicates with the pituitary gland, that is either with nerve impulses, or it communicates, so it is communicating electrically, or it communicates via the blood through the release of hormones. So you realize that your pituitary gland, which is responsible for the control of other glands within the body, which excrete hormones, is known as a gonadotrophin. Gonadotrophin meaning that it controls other hormones. Now that we know the relationship that exists between the two, that is our nervous system and the endocrine system, what kind of a system is an endocrine system? What kind of a system is a nervous system? That is what we want to know. To understand what a system is, our nervous system and our endocrine system, we've already identified that there is a relationship between the two. And the relationship is defined by the sense that it is about relaying about messages. So now we know that our nervous system and our endocrine system is about relaying of messages. We now want to understand the difference between the messages. You realize that as far as the endocrine system is concerned, it works with, the endocrine system works with chemical messages which are relayed through hormones. On the other hand, our peripheral nervous system, so to understand that, maybe I'll pose a question that will help us to understand. Our peripheral nervous system, how do you define it in simplicity? How do you define your peripheral nervous system in simple terms? You realize that the building block for your nervous system are neural impulses. So in other words, the type of messages that are relayed by your nervous system, be it your central nervous system or your peripheral nervous system, these are neural impulses. So this is the first thing that we have gotten to cover. So by now we are done as far as objective number 2 is concerned. Let's move on. Type of neurons. Now we're moving on to see the type of neurons within our nervous system. Like we have already identified and explained that the type of messages that are relayed by our peripheral nervous system are neural impulses. Now we want to know the type of neurons. And maybe before we get into that, I'd love for us to pay attention to this particular site, this section of information. I know maybe it's not you cannot really see it, it's not clear, but what I will do is explain. So you realize that our nervous system, just as our endocrine system, works in order to control organs within our body, glands, particularly glands that are within our body. The nervous system also have a function, and there's certain organs or certain structures within our body that it is targeting. And you realize that the peripheral nervous system is about control of organs, and we're speaking of your skeletal muscles, we're speaking of cardiac muscles, we're speaking of smooth muscles, and we're speaking of the other organs of the body. That is what basically the control of the nervous system, they control the type of muscles that it controls. Then now back to the types of the neural impulses, or rather the types of the neural cells that are found within your nervous system. It is made up basically of three types of neurons. You talk of your sensory neuron or your motor neuron, and of interest is your interneuron, which is found primarily within your central nervous system. That is why I recorded it on the other side. So now what we have done is we've looked into the type of neurons within our nervous system. So you realize that your sensory neurons are defined by what are known as receptors. On the other hand, your motor neurons are defined by what is known as effectors. And the other name for sensory neuron is afferent neuron. The other name for motor neuron is efferent neurons. So in place of sensory, you can use afferent. In place of motor, you can use efferent. So what we now need to get into is to look into the type of receptors that you find under your sensory neuron. You find receptors such as mechanoreceptors, and mechanoreceptors are responsible for the innervation of mechanoreceptors for pressure, vibration, and you move on to chemoreceptors. This is change in terms of your chemical composition, and then the pressure receptors, and then there is nociceptors for pain, and there are thermoreceptors that deal with temperature. And now that we have covered the types of neurons that you find within the peripheral nervous system, we move on to the other objectives. And the other objective was to look into the types of the peripheral nervous system, because what I'll do for now is I'll just look into the common ones, the common types, so you can call them pathways if you want to do so. Your peripheral nervous system is made up of the somatic nervous system and also the autonomic nervous system. There's a third one that we shall get into, but for now I just want for us to look into the autonomic nervous system and the somatic nervous system. So basically what we want to start off with is to try and understand the definition. How do we define your autonomic nervous system, and how do you differentiate it? How do you tell it apart from the somatic nervous system. When we hear the word somatic, think of bodily, it refers to the body. And then when you hear of the word autonomic, you can think of something that says automatic. So in other words, it's got something that has to do with involuntary activities. So when we're talking of somatic, in other words, we're looking at innervation of external actions. You can call them external impulses of that, what you find on your skin, what you find on your on muscles and your sensory organs. But now when it comes to the autonomic nervous system, like as I pointed out, it has to do that with activities that are involuntary, and that has got to do with the control of your internal organs and glands, because you can't really control your gland, you can't really control what happens on smooth muscles. Like if you want to know the distinction between the two, this one has got to do with the skeletal muscles, because it's about control. You decide when to move. Your movement is something that is conscious. You make a conscious decision to move. But when it comes to things like digestion, once you swallow food, once you ingest food and you swallow it and it's within the esophagus going down at the GIT, you cannot really control what becomes of it. So now the nervous system that is now in charge is your autonomic nervous system. And I'm trying to stick to our objective side, that I don't get to miss the information that we need, the key information to understand, to acclimatize everything. As illustrated here, your somatic system is innervates your skeletal muscles, and that solely caters for your voluntary movement. And objective number 4 was to pinpoint, like specifically pinpoint the activities that are innervated by your autonomic nervous system. So let's for now what we're going to do is there's not really much to talk about as far as innervation of your somatic nervous system is concerned, because we've already alluded to the fact that what we're looking into is innervation of external actions of your skin, of your muscles and the sense organs. But now what is particularly interesting is the autonomic system. But now what you can say about the somatic system and the autonomic system in terms of their similarities, you will realize that your somatic system also is defined by sensory and motor neurons, but mainly your motor neurons. And then in the same vein, your autonomic system is also defined by sensory and motor neurons. But now, as far as we want to see what kind of activities are innervated by the autonomic system, your autonomic system innervates what is known as your parasympathetic nervous system and also your sympathetic nervous system. So in other words, when you can divide your autonomic system into, like I said, like I alluded to earlier on, it can be divided into 3 systems, which I'll get to look into the other one in the upcoming presentation. But for now, what we're going to do, we're just going to look particularly into your parasympathetic nervous system and your sympathetic nervous system. So how do I get to explain it? These 2 systems, they're sort of a positive and a negative. They work together. You can't really say they work sort of. They work in. They go by side. You cannot really say the parasympathetic works on its own and the sympathetic system works on its own, because the function of these 2 systems, they are supposed to bring what is known as homeostasis. They're supposed to define a constant environment within your body. and is regulated by stimuli, by the kind of impulses that are relayed by the nerve endings. So what we are doing right now is your parasympathetic system, what kind of activities does it control? Your parasympathetic nervous system is that type of autonomic system that deals with a state whereby you are resting and digesting. So whenever you hear of the parasympathetic system, think of resting and digesting. So we'll try and look into the kind of activities, all activities that are controlled by the autonomic nervous system. Then after having done that, we'll then see which activities fall under your parasympathetic nervous system. And in the sense vein, your sympathetic nervous system is also the type of autonomic system which regulates responses such as fear and flight. Now that we have defined these distinct activities, which are rest and digest under your parasympathetic, and also fear and flight parasympathetic, we also want to know how your nervous system at this particular junction works together with your endocrine system, and it works through neurotransmitters. So as far as the parasympathetic nervous system is concerned, the predominant, or rather the primary neurotransmitter is the acetylcholine. That is the one that regulates